How do you rebuild when your wife and your best friend betray you in the same night? For Alexander, it wasn't just about revenge, it was about turning their betrayal into the foundation of an empire. In the early days of Lee and Maxwell Enterprises, Alexander Lee and Russell Maxwell were a force to be reckoned with. Together, they built what started as a modest startup into a dominant player in the industry. Alexander's meticulous focus on strategy combined perfectly with Russell's natural charisma and knack for seizing opportunities. Investors flocked to their venture, enchanted by Russell's charm and reassured by Alexander's steady hand. Their professional triumphs only strengthened their personal bond, culminating in a lavish celebration for their company's 5th anniversary, a night that symbolized not just their business success but also the growing intertwining of their lives. As the company expanded, however, tensions began to surface. What started as subtle disagreements over business strategy gradually escalated. Alexander prioritized discipline and long-term stability, while Russell often leaned toward high-risk, high-reward ventures. Despite these differences, Alexander never questioned his partner's loyalty. Nor did he suspect his wife, Gloria, whose grace and charm bolstered his public image and seemed to perfectly complement his reserved demeanor. Yet beneath the surface, hidden truths were waiting to disrupt both his business and his marriage. Late one night, Alexander sat in his dimly lit home office, his face illuminated by the cool glow of his computer screen. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the window, the rhythmic sound echoing through the vast, empty mansion. Gloria had said she was home, but the house felt strangely hollow, as if her presence had already faded. Alexander's tired eyes scanned the financial data on his screen, his cursor hovering uncertainly over a set of figures when a new notification appeared at the corner of his monitor. It was a message from Thomas Reed, his private investigator. The weekly report had arrived. Alexander's jaw tightened as he clicked to open the message, bracing himself for what was to come. One by one, photos began to load. The first image showed Gloria's silver Mercedes pulling into the parking garage of the upscale Constellation Hotel at 7:45 p.m. on Wednesday. The next captured her stepping out of the elevator 40 minutes later, wearing a red dress, the same one she had claimed was at the dry cleaners. And then came the final image, Russell Maxwell, his trusted business partner, emerging from the hotel a few minutes after Gloria, adjusting his tie as if to set everything back into place. Before Alexander could process the implications of what he had just seen, a soft knock echoed from the door behind him. Mr. Lee. Maria, their housekeeper, stood quietly in the doorway. Mrs. Lee called, she said softly. She won't be home until 11. Her dinner with Miss Kate is running late. Alexander glanced at his watch. 9:45 p.m., right on schedule, the same time Gloria always seemed to call on Wednesdays. He gave Maria a polite nod. Thanks, Maria. You can head home for the night. Once Maria left, Alexander walked over to the safe, entered the combination, and retrieved a worn leather-bound notebook. Flipping it open, he methodically added tonight's new details to the growing list, Gloria's new passwords, the gym membership all the way across town, her sudden fascination with book clubs that never seemed to involve any actual books. Each entry felt like another piece of a puzzle he didn't want to complete but couldn't ignore. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Jonathan Griffith, his lawyer and oldest friend. Got your message. Free for breakfast tomorrow? Alexander typed back quickly, 7 a.m. at the diner on 7th, bring everything on Russell's Singapore project. Satisfied, he closed his laptop and walked toward the large bay window. The rain had intensified, turning the once familiar garden into a blurred canvas of shadows and shifting light. 8 years of sweat and sacrifice. 8 years of building Lee and Maxwell Enterprises into a multi-billion-dollar empire, now teetering on the edge, undone by something as simple as a hotel key card, and a red dress. A faint click at the front door signaled Gloria's return. Moments later, the familiar sound of her heels echoed across the marble floor. He could hear her laugh, the same perfectly practiced laugh she used at charity galas and high society functions, polished until it sparkled with just the right amount of charm. Alexander remained motionless, listening. The soft thud of her purse being set down, the clatter of heels kicked off near the console table, the rustling of her coat. "Alex," her voice called, light and cheerful. "Still working, darling?" Quickly, he composed himself, setting his expression into one of mild interest before turning. "Just finishing up. How was dinner with Kate?" Gloria appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair damp from the rain. The red dress was gone, replaced by something far more casual, yet Alexander's mind couldn't let go of the image from earlier. She offered a practiced smile as she stepped closer. "You know Kate, 3 glasses of wine, and suddenly she's spilling all her dating drama," she said, punctuating her words with a light kiss on his cheek. Her perfume lingered in the air, now unmistakably mixed with the familiar scent of Russell's cologne. "You work too hard, honey," she said, her tone playful as she leaned in. "Come to bed. The company will survive one night without you." "In a bit," Alexander replied smoothly, returning her smile. "Just need to go over a few reports for tomorrow's meeting." She pouted, playfully teasing him. "What would this company do without you?" Before he could answer, her phone buzzed. Gloria glanced at the screen briefly, then tucked it away without a word, offering another quick kiss before heading upstairs. Alexander remained where he was, watching her retreating figure. Every moment, every laugh, every touch, felt rehearsed now, a carefully choreographed performance masking something far deeper. The rain outside grew heavier, the sound drumming against the windows as Gloria's shower started upstairs, its faint hum filling the otherwise silent house. Slowly, Alexander turned back to his desk and opened the company's organizational chart. He traced the lines connecting names and departments, studying it with the intensity of a general preparing for war. Russell might have Gloria, but Alexander had something far more valuable, the loyalty of key employees and board members, not to mention a growing file of evidence detailing Russell's questionable dealings. His eyes scanned his contacts list until they landed on a familiar name, Marcy King, the CFO. Marcy had been subtly raising concerns about Russell's recent activities for weeks. Alexander had brushed it off at first, but now her insights seemed more important than ever. He tapped her name, preparing a text, "We need to discuss Russell's financial irregularities. Usual place. Tomorrow after my meeting." Just as he hit send, Janet, his assistant, knocked softly at the door, peeking in. "Everything okay, Mr. Lee?" "Yes, Janet," Alexander replied smoothly. "Make it 2 reports for tomorrow's meeting." With the pieces falling into place, Alexander leaned back in his chair. He might have been blindsided by betrayal, but he wasn't going down quietly. If Russell thought he could take what Alexander had built without consequence, he was sorely mistaken. "Jonathan joined me right on time." Janet gave a knowing nod toward the stack of folders on the table. "Serious business today?" "It always is," I replied, offering her a rare smile that barely reached my eyes. Jonathan Griffith walked in about 5 minutes later, his suit looking a little worse for wear. From the rumpled state of his attire and the weary look in his eyes, I figured he'd pulled another late night at the office. His briefcase bulged with documents as he slid into the booth. "You look rough," I said, sliding a steaming cup of coffee in his direction. "Long night," he muttered, taking a grateful sip. "Ramsey's been poking around. You know how he is with audits, thorough to a fault." I nodded, remembering how Randall Ramsey had thrown his weight behind me when I first proposed the merger that turned Lee and Maxwell Enterprises into the giant it was today. "What about Stephanie? Does Russell's wife suspect anything?" I asked. Jonathan hesitated, glancing down at his coffee. "She's too busy with her upcoming gala to notice much of anything right now. But there's something else." He paused, his tone shifting to something more personal. "It's about my new girlfriend, Kate." I raised an eyebrow. Gloria's friend Kate? He nodded. Yeah, last night she mentioned something odd. Apparently, Gloria's been asking around about corporate accounts. That caught my attention. Corporate accounts? Did she say why? No, just something about it coming up during one of their conversations. I thought you'd want to know. I leaned back, considering the implications. Russell might have been whispering things in Gloria's ear, feeding her information to use against me. I'd need to move quickly. With enough proof, how soon can we act? Jonathan didn't hesitate. 24 hours, but we'll need Marcy's sign-off. I glanced at my watch. She should be in her office by now. Reach out to her and set up a lunch meeting. There's that new restaurant she's been wanting to try near her building. Let's meet there. Gathering the documents in front of me, I kept my movements controlled, careful not to betray the storm brewing inside. One more thing, Jonathan, start divorce proceedings. Quietly. Don't file anything just yet. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice low and cautious. Are you sure about this, Alex? Once we start, there's no going back. I met his gaze, my expression hard. I'm sure. Trust isn't something you rebuild once it's broken. Marcy King didn't waste time. She'd been with the company for 6 years and had earned her reputation as a financial watchdog, sharp, meticulous, and immune to Russell's charm. How bad is it? I asked as we settled into the booth. Marcy rubbed her temples, fatigue evident in her expression. Remember the Q2 irregularities we flagged? It's worse than we thought. Russell's been manipulating project costs, creating fake vendors, and inflating fees. And the Singapore expansion? That's just the tip of the iceberg. A knock interrupted us as the delivery person arrived with our lunch. Once the food was unwrapped, we got back to business. For the next hour, Marcy laid out her findings, each revelation darker than the last. Jonathan jotted down notes furiously while I focused on absorbing every detail. Toward the end of our meeting, Marcy handed over a folder with key documents. As I took it, I gave her a nod. This stays between us. Russell thinks he's untouchable. Let's keep it that way, for now. Back in my office, I noticed a new message waiting on my phone. It was from Stephanie Maxwell, Russell's wife. Are you attending the charity gala next weekend? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked over to the wall where my diplomas and awards hung, symbols of what I had built, what was now at risk. Tomorrow, I would begin taking down Russell piece by piece. Tonight, I'd remind myself of one harsh truth: in both business and marriage, trust wasn't just a foundation, it was a weapon, and it hurt the most when wielded by those closest to you. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Board members filtered in, their usual small talk subdued by the weight of the day's agenda. At the head of the table stood Russell Maxwell, exuding confidence as he handed out glossy presentation folders. What I'm about to share, he began with a practiced air of authority, will revolutionize our current operations. Our outdated methods no longer serve us. Our research shows. I sat back, watching him closely, his every word only fueling the plan I had spent all night refining. Let him bask in this moment. He wouldn't see what was coming. I think we should hear from our CFO, Alexander interjected smoothly, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. All eyes turned toward him, the quiet authority in his tone impossible to ignore. Marcy, what's your take? Marcy stood confidently, her expression calm and professional as she connected her laptop to the projector. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of detailed charts and figures. Several board members leaned forward, their interest piqued by the data now filling the room. We've thoroughly analyzed the proposed expansion, Marcy began, her voice steady but firm. The returns Russell presented are based on an overly optimistic, best-case scenario. They don't align with current market trends, and frankly, they ignore key risks. She paused for effect, letting her words sink in. Additionally, our audit has revealed troubling patterns in the preliminary expenditures, questionable vendor invoices, inflated costs, and discrepancies that warrant immediate investigation. A murmur spread across the table, tension thickening as the implications became clear. Russell's usual confidence faltered for a brief moment before he spoke, trying to regain control. "This is absurd. Alexander, we built this company together, you can't seriously." "I move that we halt the expansion," Alexander said calmly, cutting off Russell mid-sentence. "We need a full audit by an external firm and an immediate freeze on all discretionary spending until we can assess the full scope of these issues." "I second the motion," another board member added without hesitation. Russell scanned the room, searching desperately for support, but found none. His once loyal allies sat stone-faced, unwilling to come to his defense. Alexander's calm, commanding presence left no room for debate. "All in favor?" Alexander's voice was cool, almost dispassionate. Around the table, hands rose one by one. Russell's bravado crumbled as he realized the tide had turned against him. His carefully crafted empire was beginning to fall apart. "Motion carried," Alexander announced, his voice firm. "Marcy, secure all relevant accounts by the end of the day." By evening, the golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across Alexander's desk. He was engrossed in the audit reports when Gloria appeared in the doorway, dressed impeccably in a designer outfit. Her irritation was clear in her tone. "You've been impossible to reach today." "Board meeting ran long," Alexander replied without looking up. Russell's expansion plan didn't go as expected. Gloria's fingers tightened around her phone, a flicker of tension flashing across her features. "That's surprising." He seemed so confident about it. "Confidence doesn't always equal competence," Alexander said quietly, finally lifting his gaze to meet hers. He noticed the fresh coat of lipstick and the faint scent of perfume, details that didn't escape his attention, even now. Gloria shifted uncomfortably but said nothing more, offering only a terse smile before turning and walking away. Alexander watched her go, a strange calm settling over him. He was no longer reacting, he was acting, and every move now was deliberate. The next evening, the Hopkins Foundation's annual gala took place at the Metropolitan Museum's rooftop garden, a dazzling event that drew the city's elite. The weather was perfect, and the skyline sparkled in the background as Alexander arrived fashionably late, as planned. He moved through the crowd with ease, noting how Russell and Gloria carefully kept their distance, each stealing nervous glances when they thought no one was watching. Stephanie Hopkins, radiant in a midnight blue gown, greeted him warmly. "Alexander, I'm so glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," he said, kissing her cheek with a practiced ease. He was keenly aware of Russell's eyes on him from across the garden, a tension simmering beneath the surface of the glittering affair. He sipped his champagne, keeping his expression neutral, even as his phone buzzed discreetly in his pocket. It was a message from Marcy. "Audit team found something big. Emergency board meeting set for Monday." Alexander calmly pocketed his phone, glancing once more at his wife and former business partner. They were trying to maintain their composure, but the cracks were beginning to show. Their world was unraveling, piece by piece. Timing, he reminded himself, was everything. Monday dawned gray and rainy, turning Manhattan into a sea of umbrellas and slowed traffic. Alexander sat in his office, skimming through the flood of audit reports that filled his inbox. Each new detail further solidified what he already suspected: Russell's recklessness had dug a hole too deep to climb out of. A sharp knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Jonathan entered, his expression grim. "Russell's been trying to rally support among the board. He's desperate. He knows what's coming." "Let him try," Alexander replied coldly. "It won't change anything." Jonathan hesitated before leaning forward. "He's going to play dirty, Alex. Your position, your reputation, your marriage, he'll go after it all." He can't prove anything, Alexander said, his voice quiet but resolute. And when he makes his move, we'll be ready. This wasn't just about business anymore, it was personal. Alexander had built the company, nurtured it from the ground up, and now, he would defend it by any means necessary. Trust had been their greatest strength, but betrayal had turned it into a weapon. By the time Russell realized it, it would already be too late. I already have, Alexander said coldly, sliding a thick folder across the desk toward Russell. The board meets at 2. You might want to consider resigning before they see this. Russell snatched the folder with trembling hands, flipping through the incriminating evidence in silence. Bank statements, wire transfers, and falsified reports, everything meticulously documented. Without a word, he stormed out of the office, his anger palpable. The morning passed quickly, a blur of meetings and final preparations. By lunchtime, whispers of something big had spread throughout the office. Employees speculated about what could be happening behind closed doors. Alexander remained composed, eating a simple sandwich at his desk while reviewing his presentation one last time. His phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. You should go, Gloria. Your boyfriend has an important meeting to attend. Alexander glanced at it briefly before returning to his work, indifferent to the chaos unfolding around him. At exactly 2 p.m., Alexander entered the boardroom, flanked by Marcy King and Jonathan Griffith. Russell sat alone at the far end of the table, his usual allies conspicuously absent. The tension in the room was thick, but Alexander remained calm, allowing Marcy to take the lead. For the next hour, Marcy methodically laid out their findings. One by one, she presented evidence, unauthorized bank transactions, falsified financial reports, and payments funneled through shell companies. With every new revelation, Russell's composure crumbled. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming, leaving no room for doubt. When the vote was called, it was swift and unanimous. Russell Maxwell was officially removed from his position, stripped of his authority and influence. The man who had once stood proudly at Alexander's side was now left with nothing but disgrace. As the meeting ended, Alexander leaned back in his chair, exuding an air of quiet triumph. He waited until the room had cleared before turning to Gloria, who had slipped into the boardroom unnoticed. She stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale. Tell me, Gloria, Alexander said, his voice cool and measured. After all those months with Russell, did you ever wonder why it was so easy? Why I never questioned your Wednesday night dinners or your sudden interest in Kate's personal life? Her expression faltered. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I mean, Alexander continued, opening his laptop, that Russell is about to learn a hard lesson about mixing pleasure with business. He turned the screen toward her, revealing a set of documents that made her stumble backward into a chair. The color drained from her face as she scanned the files in disbelief. That's impossible, she whispered, her hands trembling. Not impossible, Alexander corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. Carefully planned. Before she could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the message from Jonathan, confirmation received. Russell's assets have been frozen. Stephanie knows about Russell, Alexander said, sipping his drink calmly. She's aware of how he used company funds to finance your little rendezvous. And she's grateful for my help in protecting her foundation's interests. The foundation, Gloria repeated, her voice faint as realization dawned. The gala. When you told Stephanie it would be a shame if anything threatened the funding. I was making sure she understood her options, Alexander said, his tone sharp. Just as I'm ensuring you understand yours. Gloria's eyes filled with panic. You really think you can flaunt this scheme and walk away unscathed? Flaunt it? Alexander said, his lips curling into a cold smile. You and Russell flaunted your affair. You spent my money, my resources, and you thought there'd be no consequences. I'll fight you, she spat weakly, though her voice trembled with fear. Both of us will. Both of you? Alexander laughed, the sound cold and cutting. Russell is facing criminal charges for financial fraud. His assets are frozen, his reputation is in tatters, and his wife's lawyers are already circling. He won't be fighting anyone, except prosecutors. As if on cue, Gloria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face draining of all color. Another message from Russell appeared, confirming that he was being escorted out of the building by security. Alexander observed her reaction with quiet satisfaction. "Ah," he said, his tone almost amused. "I see he's heard from Stephanie's lawyers. Timing is everything, Gloria." The rain outside intensified, its steady rhythm echoing the storm brewing inside Gloria's mind. She sat frozen, grappling with the reality of her situation, one carefully orchestrated move after another, each executed with precision. Alexander stood, straightening his jacket. "I built this company. I trusted both of you, and you betrayed me. Now, you're just collateral damage." As he turned to leave, Gloria called after him weakly. "What are you going to do?" He paused at the doorway, glancing back at her. "That depends entirely on you. But don't forget, trust, once broken, becomes the sharpest weapon." Without another word, Alexander walked out, leaving Gloria alone in the empty boardroom, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like the storm raging outside. The rain continued its steady rhythm, a fitting backdrop to Gloria's quiet collapse. In one fateful evening, she had lost everything, her marriage, her lifestyle, and the man she had gambled everything for. Alexander, the husband she had so thoroughly underestimated, had watched it all unfold with cold detachment, his eyes devoid of the warmth she once took for granted. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a bright, unforgiving sky. Russell Maxwell arrived at Lee and Maxwell Enterprises, looking exhausted and on edge. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the thick folder in front of him, his face growing paler with every page. "This is impossible. These accounts were private," he hissed. "Nothing's private when you're misusing company funds," Jonathan remarked, checking his watch. "There's a car waiting downstairs. I suggest you pack up your office, under supervision, of course." Meanwhile, Marcy King observed the scene from her office window, texting Alexander, "Status, he's here. Starting to realize what he's lost." "Good. Keep me updated," Alexander replied. Downstairs, Gloria entered the building, still wearing the clothes from the previous night. Her mascara was smudged, and her expression was a mix of desperation and anger. She demanded to see Alexander, her voice rising until security stepped in, escorting her out of the building as she protested futilely. Back upstairs, Alexander was in a meeting with Stephanie Maxwell, who had signed several key documents with steady hands. "I should have seen this coming," she admitted, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "He fooled a lot of people." Alexander's tone remained neutral. "The real question is, what's next?" Stephanie met his gaze, her expression hardening with resolve. "Protect what I've built. Russell can lose everything, but he won't take my foundation down with him." Their meeting was briefly interrupted by the commotion from the lobby. Through the glass walls, they both saw Gloria being escorted out, her dignity shattered. Stephanie sighed, but Alexander remained unmoved, refocusing on their discussion. In the weeks that followed, Lee and Maxwell Enterprises underwent a transformation. The old logo was replaced with a sleek new design that symbolized Alexander's successful takeover. Employees, far from fearful, admired the precision with which he had orchestrated the company's recovery. Under his leadership, respect for the company grew as it entered a new era of stability and growth. In his expanded corner office, Alexander reviewed the latest quarterly reports. The numbers reflected what he had worked tirelessly to achieve: recovery, investor confidence, and steady growth. Even the Singapore project, once a source of turmoil, was now thriving under new management. A soft knock on the door interrupted his focus. Marcy King entered, carrying a bottle of champagne. "Thought you might want to celebrate," she said with a rare smile. Alexander glanced at her, then back at the reports. "It's not about celebrating," he said quietly, standing to pour them each a glass. "It's about understanding what it means to build something real." They clinked glasses, the sound sharp in the quiet office. As they stood by the window, they watched the city lights flicker on, casting a golden glow across the skyline. Below, workers filtered out of the building, heading home, their lives untouched by the corporate drama that had played out behind closed doors. Marcy broke the comfortable silence. "You planned this perfectly." Alexander shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't a plan. I just made sure I was prepared. That's all any of us can do." After a brief trial, Russell Maxwell accepted a plea deal, 5 years in a minimum security prison, complete forfeiture of his assets, and a lifetime ban from working with any publicly traded company. Reports indicated that during his time in prison, Russell spent his days obsessively following Lee International stock, a bitter, daily reminder of what he had lost. 5 years later, Lee International's headquarters towered above Manhattan's skyline, a symbol of Alexander's dominance in the corporate world. The company's rise had become a case study in business schools, a testament to strategic leadership and resilience in the face of betrayal. Inside his office, Alexander sat reviewing a portfolio when Jonathan entered with a smirk. "Thought you'd like to see this," he said, holding up his phone. "Gloria's social media. She's adjusted." Alexander glanced briefly at the screen. The once glamorous woman who attended elite charity galas now led a modest suburban life. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by practical suits, and her posts hinted at a life far removed from the one she once flaunted. He gave the photo only a passing glance before turning back to his work. Whatever part Gloria and Russell had played in his life was over. They were now just cautionary tales, reminders of how trust, when broken, could destroy even the strongest of bonds. As the sun set over the city, Alexander leaned back in his chair, reflecting not on what he had lost, but on what he had built, and what lay ahead. Trust, he thought, was a double-edged sword. It could break you, but if wielded wisely, it could also be your greatest weapon. On his desk, Jonathan placed a file with a knowing smirk. "She tried dating an executive last year," he said, raising an eyebrow. Until he Googled her. Kate, seated nearby, added with a grin, "Your story has become quite the cautionary tale in certain circles." Alexander's phone buzzed with an email. It was from Russell, still clinging to the past, now claiming Gloria had forced him into embezzlement during their affair. Alexander chuckled quietly. "They deserve each other," he muttered. His intercom buzzed next, reminding him of the upcoming board meeting. 5 years after the scandal, Lee International's board had transformed entirely, rebuilt with trusted members who shared Alexander's vision. The company had flourished under his leadership, becoming a model of stability and innovation. "One more thing," Jonathan said, his tone more serious now. Gloria's lawyer reached out. "She wants the NDA lifted. Says she's writing a memoir." "Absolutely not," Alexander replied firmly. "She made her choices. She doesn't get to rewrite the narrative." Jonathan nodded, unsurprised. "It's ironic, really. After Russell's downfall, they exposed everything, but all it did was lay the groundwork for your success." "Failure often lays the foundation for success," Alexander remarked, gesturing for Marcy to take a seat as Jonathan left. "Stephanie's latest project is impressive," Marcy began, opening a presentation on her laptop. "Her foundation is revolutionizing STEM education in developing countries." "And the Gates partnership?" "Just the start." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Stephanie's work was a testament to resilience. After the scandal, she had rebuilt her life, her foundation, and even remarried. It was a stark contrast to Russell's fate, a man who had clung to illusions of power until the end. As they spoke, Alexander's phone vibrated with an alert from building security. Gloria had tried to enter the lobby again, claiming she had important documents for him. Like her previous attempts, each more desperate than the last, this one ended with security escorting her out, politely but firmly. "Still trying," Marcy commented. "Still failing," Alexander replied, his tone indifferent. "Some lessons take longer to learn." A calendar reminder popped up on his phone: dinner with Jonathan and Kate, anniversary celebration. Their relationship, forged in the aftermath of betrayal, had grown into something genuine and lasting, a rare bright spot amid all the chaos. The next morning, Alexander met Jonathan for an early breakfast at the corner cafe, in the same booth where they had plotted Russell's downfall 5 years ago. He rambled a lot, Jonathan said, referring to a recent message from one of Russell's old acquaintances. But he mentioned something interesting. Apparently, Russell once said Gloria was the beautiful poison that destroyed everything he built. Alexander stirred his coffee slowly, recalling the ambitious partner who had once helped build Lee and Maxwell Enterprises. "Send flowers to Stephanie and Lauren," he said after a moment. "They shouldn't hear about this from the media." "Already done," Jonathan replied, sliding his phone across the table. On the screen was an email from the prison psychiatrist, reporting that Russell had become obsessed with Lee International's stock ticker, checking it daily in the prison library. It was a bitter irony: Russell, once a charismatic dealmaker, now reduced to a man watching from the sidelines as the empire he tried to steal continued to thrive without him. As the morning sun filtered through the cafe windows, it highlighted the silver in Alexander's hair. At 50, he had become what Russell had only pretended to be, a true titan of industry, respected not for charm but for substance and strategy. Later that evening, Alexander returned to his office high above Manhattan. He poured himself a drink and opened a personal document he rarely revisited, his original plan, drafted the night he first saw the private investigators' photos of Gloria and Russell. Every step had been carefully outlined: gathering evidence, securing allies, timing each revelation with precision. But on the final page, something stood out: a list of possible outcomes for everyone involved. Alexander had considered every scenario, but he hadn't shared it with anyone. He thought of Stephanie, who had rebuilt her life so completely that she was now legally changing her name, severing any remaining connection to Russell. "Her foundation will be her legacy now," she had told him recently, "not his." Alexander's gaze drifted to the city lights flickering to life outside his window. Somewhere in Connecticut, Gloria was likely facing the fallout from her latest public meltdown. Somewhere in a prison cell, Russell was watching the rise of Lee International, powerless to stop it. They had clung to illusions, while he had built something real. His phone buzzed one last time: Jonathan, confirming the next morning's board meeting. "Another quarter, another success," the message read. Alexander set down his drink and smiled faintly. True power, he reflected, wasn't in the ability to take revenge, it was in the strength to transform betrayal into triumph. The city lights twinkled like stars, each one a testament to the empire he had built from the ashes of deception. While others remained trapped by the weight of their past, Alexander had moved forward, building something lasting. And in the end, that was what real success looked like: not in destroying others, but in rising above them.